At 17, Marcus didn't know how to fight. He learned on his first night at Rikers. They called it orientation. A lesson conducted not by officers but by peers, other teenagers trapped in a world designed for men twice their size and none of their mercy. By the end of that week, Marcus had a split lip, a bruised rib, and a new name stitched into his survival, Little Blood. By the end of that month he had a crew. By the end of 90 days he had a criminal identity, and a sentence still pending in court. Inside the adolescent units of Rikers Island, children don't reform. They're refined into something harder, meaner, and infinitely more loyal to the codes that rule the corridors. This is where the state's youngest inmates learn their first adult lesson. To survive, you must become the thing they already think you are. Every society has its apprenticeship systems. Some teach trade, others teach law. Rikers Island teaches violence. For decades, its teenage units, the adolescent male facilities known internally as RNDC, EMTC, and later the Horizon Detention Center, have functioned not as rehabilitative programs, but as accelerators of criminal education. This film isn't about teenage crime. It's about what happens when a state builds an institution that trains adolescents in the language of aggression, hierarchy, and trauma, and then releases them back into the world fluent. The insight is brutal but simple. If prison is a school, Rikers teenage units are the postgraduate academy of recidivism. In 1978, New York City began housing adolescents separately within Rikers Island, under pressure from courts and reform advocates. The goal was to create age-appropriate environments, smaller dorms, education programs, and specialized staff. The result was the Robert N. Davern Complex, RNDC, named after a former commissioner who championed modern correctional philosophy. In reality, it became a laboratory of failure. By 1990, the complex housed nearly 900 youths between 16 and 18 years old, most awaiting trial. Half would never be convicted of their original charges. But all would be changed by the experience. A 1994 City Council report quietly concluded, "The adolescent housing areas are breeding grounds for learned aggression and organized gang activity." The phrase breeding grounds was literal. Every feature of RNDC's architecture amplified tension. Long dormitory layouts replaced individual cells, 40 bunks per unit, minimal supervision, a single officer for dozens of teenagers. Noise levels reached 90 decibels during peak hours. There were no quiet zones, no private spaces, and no safety exits. Design bred chaos. Chaos bred hierarchy. Hierarchy bred gangs. A 2010 investigation by the Department of Justice described the units as spontaneous ecosystems of violence. Teenagers developed social orders around dominance rituals, fights, intimidation, theft. Officers, outnumbered and undertrained, relied on informal alliances with inmate leaders to maintain control. The jail became a closed society where the strong ruled, the weak adapted, and everyone learned. Every day at Rikers teenage units begins with 3 sounds: keys, boots, and orders. But the real lessons happen after count. A typical dayroom interaction, 2 teens arguing over commissary snacks, escalates into a fight. Officers watch from behind plexiglass, waiting for dominance to establish itself. Intervention is rare, paperwork is time-consuming. By the end of the shift, new hierarchies have formed. A boy who arrived last week now controls the phone schedule. Another one loses his sneakers and his dignity. This is the hidden curriculum. Control through fear. Respect through violence. Silence as survival. Psychologists later described this as institutional learning through negative reinforcement. It's how trauma becomes education. Correction officers assigned to adolescent units receive minimal specialized training. In 2014, an internal DOC memo admitted that juvenile de-escalation techniques are not consistently applied. Many staff members came from adult facilities, bringing the same disciplinary style: intimidation, not mentorship. Youths responded predictably: defiance, mimicry, retaliation. The guards' aggression validated the inmates' worldview. Authority is predatory, resistance is identity. Former officers described the atmosphere as a pressure cooker with a teenage fuse. Their coping mechanisms, cynicism, withdrawal, and sometimes participation in the violence, blurred moral boundaries beyond repair. 5. The gangification process. By the mid-2000s, Bloods and Crips factions dominated the RNDC housing units. New arrivals were pressured to affiliate within days, for protection, not ideology. Refusal invited isolation or assault. This created what sociologist Jill Levinson called a criminal socialization loop. A teenager enters unaligned, experiences violence, adopts a gang identity for safety, and exits more committed than before. In effect, the system manufactures loyalty to antisocial codes as a survival mechanism. A 2012 Board of Correction report quantified the outcome. Within 90 days, 87% of adolescents in high-security units self-identify with gang affiliation, compared to 23% upon intake. That's not rehabilitation. That's recruitment. Every day, students line up for class, inside modular trailers, unheated in winter, sweltering in summer. Most teachers are substitutes hired through temp contracts. Lesson plans rarely survive the first fight of the morning. In 2013, the Department of Education reported that the average adolescent inmate at Rikers received 5 hours of instruction per week, far below the state mandate of 25. Graduation rates hovered near zero. But a different kind of education thrived. How to file grievances. How to manipulate officers. How to hide weapons. How to fight efficiently in confined spaces. In short, how to survive in a system where violence is currency. Isolation, fear, and humiliation compound quickly in the adolescent brain. Neuroscientists at Columbia University, 2018, found that 16 to 18-year-olds exposed to prolonged incarceration exhibit accelerated amygdala growth, the region controlling fear and aggression, and stunted prefrontal development, responsible for impulse control. Rikers teenage units are not just physically dangerous, they're neurologically corrosive. Every 90-day stay leaves a measurable imprint: hypervigilance, distrust, and reward-seeking through dominance. In psychological terms, the system is not correcting behavior, it's codifying it. Upon release, adolescents return to the same neighborhoods with new reputations and old traumas. They've learned to speak the dialect of violence fluently. Community members, police, teachers, peers respond accordingly. Recidivism within 1 year, 62%. Within 3 years, 81%. The cycle completes itself as predictable as gravity. The state calls this failure. The system calls it continuity. The Rikers adolescent system does not operate through education or rehabilitation. It operates through containment mathematics. Budgets are calculated by occupancy stability, not outcomes. The metric of success is not fewer inmates, but fewer incidents reported. Every officer, teacher, and clinician is governed by numbers. Fewer fights recorded equals improved unit performance. Lower incident rates equals continued funding. Staff injury claims equals liability. So silence becomes policy. Violence doesn't disappear, it's reclassified. The 2019 Board of Correction audit found that 42% of all physical altercations among adolescents were logged as mutual combat, meaning no one was disciplined, not staff, not inmates. That designation keeps the numbers clean. It also teaches every teenager the first rule of survival: if no one reports it, it didn't happen. When an assault occurs, paperwork moves faster than justice. Officers write identical boilerplate statements. Inmate became combative, minimum force used. Supervisors sign off without investigation. Internal Affairs buries reports under pending status until the case loses relevance. This bureaucratic sleight of hand transforms brutality into routine. And routine over time becomes invisible. Juvenile advocates describe it as administrative camouflage. The same system designed to track misconduct is now the tool that conceals it. The Correction Officers Benevolent Association, COBA, ensures that any staff member disciplined for adolescent unit violence receives immediate legal defense. Every arbitration drags months. Most end in reinstatement. This predictability shapes officer behavior. A 2016 Department of Investigation review found that 87% of COBA-backed disciplinary cases were either dismissed or reduced to minor infractions. The result? Teenage inmates learn early that adult authority operates without consequence, a perfect mirror to the streets they came from. Each adolescent bed at Rikers costs the city approximately $820 per day, more than double the adult rate. Add education, healthcare, and transportation, and the annual expenditure per teen approaches $300,000. That's more than tuition at Harvard University, yet produces the opposite of an education. Vendors profit. Food contractors, medical firms, transportation services. Overtime hours soar as staff shortages mount. Every fight, every lockdown, every administrative hearing becomes an opportunity for extra pay. The adolescent crisis sustains an entire ecosystem of dependency. As one city budget analyst put it bluntly, if the kids stop fighting, half the overtime disappears. Inside the dorms, teenagers replicate the adult world's hierarchy but with adolescent volatility. Gang affiliations define access to phones, food, and space. House gangs act as informal police, keeping weaker inmates in check, often at the officer's tacit approval. This symbiosis is called delegated control. It saves staff effort while reinforcing inmate governance. Over time, the guards become background noise. The social order runs itself. A former RNDC officer testified in a civil suit. If you wanted peace, you let the gang leaders handle discipline. They could reach kids faster than we could. What began as management convenience evolves into criminal apprenticeship. After a series of lawsuits, the city banned punitive solitary confinement for minors in 2016. But the practice persisted through euphemism. Cells labeled enhanced supervision housing, secure units, or protective custody became de facto isolation chambers. Lighting stays on 24 hours a day. Inmates leave the cell for 1 hour, alone. Mental health visits are conducted through the door slot. Between 2017 and 2022, at least 230 adolescents spent more than 23 hours a day in these non-punitive rooms. Psychologists call this learned emotional numbness. Adolescents call it the box. It teaches a deeper lesson: pain without purpose. The classroom is theoretically the heart of rehabilitation. In practice, it's another form of triage. Classes are canceled for lockdowns, staff shortages, or fights. On most days, instruction consists of worksheet packets slid under cell doors. Students learn quickly that compliance, not curiosity, earns privileges. By the time release comes, 80% of adolescent detainees test at below 6th grade reading level, regardless of age. Those who do graduate earn diplomas no college will recognize. Education becomes symbolic, proof of paperwork, not progress. Ask any social worker who's lasted more than 6 months inside RNDC what they hear most often, and they'll tell you, "I don't care." It's not apathy, it's armor. For adolescents whose trust has been broken by both authority and peers, detachment is survival. This emotional anesthesia spreads. Officers adopt the same tone. Teachers mirror it to cope. The entire institution begins to speak one dialect: weary, numb, defensive. Language itself becomes a casualty of confinement. Every word loses meaning, only power communicates. After the death of Caliph Browder and the federal lawsuits that followed, City Hall promised sweeping reforms. New buildings, more counselors, trauma-informed training. Millions were spent. Outcomes remained identical. The reforms treated symptoms: overcrowding, staffing, classification, but not the system's core logic, that control outweighs care. A 2021 audit by the Board of Correction summed it up. Despite administrative restructuring, adolescent units continue to replicate adult penal models, producing predictable cycles of violence and recidivism. Every brochure, every press conference calls the adolescent division a rehabilitative environment. But data shows that within 1 year of release, nearly 2/3 of youths are rearrested. Rehabilitation has become a rhetorical shield. It justifies budgets. It masks futility. One juvenile advocate put it best: Rikers teaches kids that the state is just another gang, better funded but no more forgiving. That sentence defines the system's true curriculum. Every 90 days the population turns over. One group leaves, another arrives. Beds never stay empty long enough to cool. Release papers are signed while intake chains rattle at the gate. To the city this looks like throughput. To the psychologists, it's replication. Each departure exports the culture of Rikers into the neighborhoods that feed it. Young men arrive home with posture, vocabulary, and reflexes shaped by incarceration, suspicious of kindness, fluent in dominance. The city calls it recidivism. In truth, it's reapplication, what was learned inside applied outside. Upon release, adolescents meet reentry specialists. They receive pamphlets for GED programs, therapy sessions, job training. But the waiting lists stretch months and the stigma arrives instantly. Probation officers treat them as adults. Employers see the word Rikers and close the door. Neighborhood gangs, however, open it wide. Recognition is currency, and the only community that welcomes them speaks the same language they learned in confinement. The state designs reentry as bureaucracy. The streets offer it as belonging. Guess which one wins? Trauma research describes Rikers adolescent survivors as carriers of institutional imprinting. Their nervous systems remain locked in survival mode. High cortisol, low trust, constant threat scanning. In therapy sessions they often recount dreams of concrete, walls closing in, keys jangling, the sensation of being watched. Post-release, aggression becomes communication. They've internalized the logic that control equals safety, that violence equals identity. Neuroscientists call this limbic capture. Rikers calls it graduation. Families of incarcerated teenagers often become secondary casualties. Parents shuttle across boroughs for visitation, enduring hours-long searches for brief 20-minute meetings. Siblings absorb the stigma at school. Grandparents drain savings for commissary deposits. A 2020 study by the Vera Institute estimated that each adolescent incarceration costs an average family over $8,000 in indirect expenses, transportation, lost wages, and psychological care. The system punishes not just the offender but the network that sustains them. One mother, interviewed after her son's release, said quietly, "He left as my boy and came home as someone I don't know, but I can't blame him. The island raised him." The label juvenile offender suggests impermanence, a phase, a mistake. But the bureaucratic record is permanent. Rikers turns children into data points in perpetuity. Once entered into the state's correctional database, that history follows them through adulthood, influencing bail, job prospects, even housing eligibility. A 2018 Columbia law study found that 85% of former Rikers adolescents were denied at least one public service due to prior incarceration. Punishment outlasts guilt. Freedom arrives with an asterisk. After 2016, reform rhetoric replaced confrontation. City officials began referring to incarcerated youth as justice-involved adolescents. Language softened, conditions did not. Politicians visited the facilities for press tours, posing beside murals painted by detainees. The optics became the reform. Behind the cameras, the same fluorescent corridors hummed with the same violence. The state learned to rebrand cruelty as compassion. That is how power survives scrutiny, by absorbing the language of its critics. No discussion of Rikers' teenage units escapes the ghost of Khalif Browder. His 3 years of pretrial detention, much of it spent in isolation, became a national symbol of injustice. But inside the island, his story functioned differently. To the youths still there, Browder was proof that the system never lets go. His death confirmed their fatalism. Survival today, revenge tomorrow, nothing in between. The city built programs in his name, the island built new walls. The contradiction is total, memorializing the victim while maintaining the weapon. Despite reform promises, city budgets for adolescent care have only grown. Between 2014 and 2023, New York spent over $4.2 billion on youth detention operations, with no measurable decline in violence or recidivism. The money sustains payrolls, contracts, and consultants, not outcomes. Each death, each lawsuit, each media scandal triggers another funding cycle. Failure is profitable. That's why it never ends. Forensic psychologists use the term compressed socialization to describe how quickly adolescents adapt to carceral norms. At Rikers, the process takes roughly 3 months, hence the 90 days. By the end of that period, behaviors once considered extreme, fighting, extortion, dominance, feel normal, even necessary. Inmates who enter as frightened boys leave as socialized offenders. The speed of transformation is both horrifying and efficient. When released, they are not rehabilitated, they are reorganized. The state has finished the job the streets began. At its core, Rikers' teenage units reveal a society's failure to distinguish between discipline and destruction. The island treats poverty as pathology, adolescence as threat, and trauma as proof of guilt. Its design is not accidental. It's the logical endpoint of decades of policy decisions prioritizing punishment over prevention. The system doesn't malfunction. It functions exactly as intended. It transforms disorder into data, suffering into employment, children into statistics, and calls it justice. In 90 days, a child can learn to read, to heal, to trust. At Rikers, in the same 90 days, a child learns something else entirely: how to stop being one. The teenage units were built to reform. Instead, they refined violence into culture. Every sentence served their rights, another chapter in America's unfinished manual on control. The search for truth continues. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share so you never miss a deeper story and the lessons behind it.